This morning, brethren, I want to begin by turning to Luke chapter 2. Luke chapter 2, where we have a situation where Jesus was missing for a few days. He was missing for 3 days, and his parents were looking for him. And after they had searched for 3 days, they finally found him. And let's begin at verse 46 of Luke chapter 2. Now so it was that after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were astonished at his understanding and answers. So when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you done this to us? Look, your father and I have sought you anxiously." And he said to them, "Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my father's business?" So brethren, we see here that Jesus tells his parents that he must be about his father's business. In other words, God's business came first. Everything else came afterwards. Now, question for us is, can we say the same thing? Are we about our Father's business? Can we say that God's business comes first in our lives? Does it take priority in our mind, in our thoughts, and in all that we do? So brethren, this morning I want to focus on this question. Are we about our Father's business? Now when God called us and we were baptized, God offered us a job to work for him. Previously, we worked for Satan. We were his slaves, and we were slaves to sin. And while we worked for him, we obtained a wage. Can anyone tell me what that wage was? Yes. In Romans 6, verse 23, it says, "The wages of sin is death." So brethren, working for Satan results in death, eternal death. Now, thankfully, all of us here have accepted God's job offer to work for him, to work in his business, to do his will. And let's go to Romans chapter 6. Romans chapter 6. And let's begin in verse 17. "But God be thanked that though you were slaves of sin, yet you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine to which you were delivered. And having been set free from sin, you became slaves of righteousness." So brethren, what we see is that spiritually speaking, we have changed jobs. We have stopped working for Satan, and now we are working for God. We are slaves of righteousness, and we have now become God's servants. And as the servants of God, we are required to serve him and his people, to do his will and not our will. We are now required to do good works, to produce fruit, to become profitable servants, profitable workers for him. And let's go now to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17, which describes God's servants and how he looks at them. Luke 17, beginning in verse 7. And which of you, having a servant plowing or tending sheep, will say to him, when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk, and afterward you will eat and drink? Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So likewise you, when you have done all these things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. So brethren, in this parable, Jesus distinguishes between a profitable servant and an unprofitable one. The unprofitable servant is one who just does what is required of him, his duties. The profitable servant, on the other hand, goes above and beyond what is required of him. The unprofitable servant does the barest minimum, just enough to get by, nothing extra. And Jesus gives another parable in Matthew chapter 25, in the parable of the talents, where once again he focuses on two types of servants. And we are all familiar with that parable, where the third servant buried his talent and God regarded him as unprofitable, whilst the first two servants were profitable and God rewarded them for their efforts. So Jesus is showing that he is looking for profitable servants, those who produce fruit, and only they will be rewarded. Now, profitable servants, their main interest is God's work, whilst with unprofitable servants, God's business is not their main focus. God comes secondary to them. God's business is like a sideline, where their main focus is on the things of the world. Now the question for us, brethren, is what type of servant are we? Are we a profitable one or an unprofitable one? Now, at this point, I like to focus on the duties of a servant of God. What is required of us? And I'd just like to look at two. The first one is that servants of God are required to appear before Him with an offering. And let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 16, which describes that. Deuteronomy 16, and let's begin in verse 16. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which He chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of tabernacles, and they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which He has given you. So we see here, brethren, that God requires that His servants bring an offering to Him when they appear before Him during these 3 seasons in the year. Now, this is the minimum standard expected of a servant of God. This is his duty. This is required of him. However, brethren, if this is all that we do, we must consider ourselves as unprofitable servants. To be considered a profitable servant, we must go beyond this minimum standard. So the question for us is, do we give an offering only on the holy days? Or do we go above and beyond that, where we give an offering at other times during the year? Could we be robbing God in tithes and offerings, as it says in Malachi chapter 3? I won't turn there because I think we're all familiar with that. Could we be stealing from God's business and not be aware of it? What type of servant are we? A profitable one or an unprofitable one? The second duty I would like to look at is that of feeding the flock. Now, in John chapter 21, 3 times we see Jesus instructing Peter to feed his sheep, to feed the brethren. Now, this is a command to all God's servants. And it must have been very important to Jesus because he says it 3 times. Now, as God's servants, do we take this command seriously? Now, we can all provide spiritual food to the brethren. Someone does not have to be giving sermonettes and sermons in order to feed the church spiritually. We can provide spiritual food when we fellowship with one another, for example, by encouraging and edifying one another, by inspiring and uplifting all of us through our words and our good deeds. Some also feed the brethren or feed the flock on the physical level by providing refreshments on the Sabbath and even providing a full meal on the holy days like today and on other occasions as well. And I would just like to thank all those who contribute to providing physical food to the brethren. Now, the early church, the early New Testament church, was known for breaking bread together, for having a meal together. And as we all know, eating together builds unity and togetherness amongst the brethren. And we also have another parable in Matthew 25, parable of the sheep and the goats, where Jesus takes note of all those who feed his sheep, and he says that he will reward them in the future. So providing physical food is another way we can feed the flock of God. So in conclusion, brethren, these are just 2 of the duties of a servant of God. There are many others. So as we come to an end of these days of unleavened bread, and as we prepare to give God an offering now, let us consider 2 questions. Are we profitable servants? And are we about our Father's business?